Happy Monday, everybody. Welcome into the walkthrough. No intern Joe today, but the show rolls on. I'm Mike Euban. Alongside me is my colleague, Wes Mitchell. And Wes, as we look back and reflect at this past weekend's game for South Carolina, there's a lot of good that we can talk about. But I think we just have to start with the fact that now we're talking about a game this upcoming week against Clemson, where certainly it was going to mean something. But now it means even more because you've won the last three. You win this game, you're bowl bound.
Yeah, Mike, and I want to first of all let's throw a shout to our buddy intern Joe. Not with us here today, but you're rocking the intern Joe shirt
Yeah,
there.
I know. If
So
you guys are watching on the YouTube show, Intern Joe has merch. I mean, it's got his
love
name
it.
on it and everything. I don't think he has like a website selling this stuff, but if he does, we'll definitely push that out there so the kid can get some more food. So he's not eating just, ramen and whatever college kids eat. Nothing wrong
Yeah,
with like some pizza in there, but, get him up there a little bit.
yeah, we'll take him to the next level there. But yeah, shout out intern Joe. And Mike, this was one of those things where people talked about this 4-game stretch, of course, the last 3 games and then Clemson. And you sort of start to look ahead and you said, well, they could maybe salvage their season if they could get hot and go on a run here. And it kind of, for me, I think if you looked at those 4 games and you started kind of trying to check them off, you'd say, of course, they should beat Jacksonville State. It ended up being probably closer than anybody over there was comfortable with. And you said they should beat Vandy, especially at home. But I was kind of already circling this Kentucky game and saying,
Mhm.
of the 4, if you're going to have a real chance to do this, I thought this game might possibly maybe even be more difficult than beating Clemson because, rivalry game, there's so many different things that go into a game like that. I thought this was the big sort of can you clear this hurdle type game. And so obviously they did. They've got some momentum and they've kind of been able to, I feel like, to build some confidence off of this November to remember mantra or whatever you want to call it. They play very, very well at Williams-Brice Stadium at night in November. And I think they're kind of building off of that, man. If you're Clemson coming into this thing, I think you're going to get South Carolina's best shot.
Yeah, another night game. And what we saw this past weekend, Darude was in there. You want to talk about a solid investment by the University of South Carolina. The timing of that could not have been any better. And I don't think anyone could have predicted that USC would have been in a position that they were, right? You have to win the next 2 games. Going to have a night game. When they made this plan, I know it was something that USC was trying to make happen for a couple of years, but bottom line is Darude was there, certainly helped with that home field advantage. When we look back over these last 3 games, Wes, what has really stood out to you the most about what South Carolina is doing? Is it just as simple as one phase? Is it just multiple things? Because I think what they're doing right now, it's got a lot of people excited because they're winning. But
Mhm.
when you start to peel back the layers, it's because they're doing a lot of things that they weren't doing during that losing streak.
Yeah, man. I think the big picture thing is just complementary football. If one side kind of has has a lull, the other side kind of picking them up, taking advantage of opportunities like that. I think if we're being honest, certainly the competition they've played is a factor. I mean, it's a little bit different competition than what they were facing during that stretch where, they were losing games. But I think you look particularly this past week, just making plays on defense when you have those opportunities, creating turnovers, whether that's getting your hand in there and getting a paw on the quarterback, whether that's Nick Emmanwori being in phase and going up and finishing the play to make an interception. I feel like during that stretch where they were really, really struggling, Mike, we saw them kind of be in position to make a couple of game-changing plays and just
Mhm.
not be able to finish them off. So for me, if you want to talk about the 3 games, just as a bundle in general, like what has stood out the most also, I got to credit this defense for continuing to just battle, not giving up, not sort of succumbing to the outside noise and just saying, look, we're going to fight this thing. What do they say? We're going to stay in the fight. I
Yep,
think
stay in
for
the fight
Clayton
is what
White,
Clayton White's been saying. Yep.
yeah, they've stayed in the fight, man. There's something to be said for that. Hasn't been perfect. The matchups have been a little bit better for them than they were during that stretch, if we're being completely honest. But they've hung in, they've played hard, and they've started to make some plays. I saw your stat about takeaways, man. When
It's
they create
insane.
takeaways,
That's
difference
insane. I
maker.
came across that last week before doing the weekly quick slant story, and I'm just like, wait a minute. Okay, they're 0-3 when they haven't forced one. 10-0 now at home in the last 2 years. I mean, that's just absolutely incredible. And as we all know, regardless of any stat, I know you know this very well from covering the Gamecocks for as long as you have. Yeah, we can make any story by looking at a certain statistic, but there's something to be said about that. And what the defense did the other night, not just with the takeaways, and I know it gives some people PTSD. I said this on the post-game show. This was a very similar situation in comparison to where they were a month ago against Florida. You have an opportunity to make a stop, you win the game. This defense, they didn't do that a month ago. Well, they did it this past week. It doesn't mean it makes that Florida game go away, but it shows that they're making progress. And you hope not just defense, special teams, that they've looked good over the last 2 weeks. Now they head into this Clemson game. You're feeling some momentum from those two phases. Offensively, especially at home, they've been great this year. But now you're coming off a game where it was a letdown for the majority of the game. What makes you feel good about this offense still heading into this last game, despite what they did last week?
Yeah, I think I'll start with the bad first, Mike. I mean, we have to acknowledge that the running game still is not up to what it really needs to be for this to be a consistent offense. And I frankly, Mike, I thought they would have ran the ball a little bit better against Vandy and Jacksonville State. I thought there were kind of signs coming into the game against Kentucky. Kentucky has had some struggles defensively this year compared to the last few years, but they're still pretty good against the run. South Carolina has not been great, obviously, running the football for much of the year. So I think that's an issue going into the Clemson game again. Like, you really can't go into a game expecting to just rush for 200 yards if you're South Carolina. I think what gives you hope if you're South Carolina and you're at home, it's 7-17, man. That's what you've kind of had all year long. If you can give Spencer Rattler some time, then he's going to get 17 the football. And what we've seen is when they get just a little bit more from the running game, like if they can just eke out a little bit, then it becomes pretty dynamic on offense. I think when they are getting very little from the running game, that's when it's just kind of disjointed. It's very based on big plays. It's kind of, all right, can I have an explosive play on this drive? Okay, I'm probably going to score. If I don't get an explosive, you're probably not scoring on those drives. And I thought what really hurt them on Saturday, Mike, was just the penalties and the negative plays and just kind of shooting yourself in the foot. And so this offense really has not been able to withstand those and still turn those drives into points. Now, they did on the final touchdown drive. That was the most impressive thing about it, is you had a 3rd and long early on in that drive, and they hit Luedecke on the little dig route. Then you had 2nd and 26 after the penalty, and they got half the yardage. Then they throw the touchdown pass on 3rd and 9. So they were able to withstand some situations where you're behind the sticks, which I think is something they've really struggled to do for much of the year. But different animal coming in, pretty good Clemson defense, man. So they're going to have a great game plan on offense, I think.
Yeah, and you can read more about this on the grading the weekly keys that we do on Gamecock Central. Just dropped it on Monday, but Wes, you mentioned that about some of these explosives, because when you go back, I thought this was pretty crazy. 3rd down conversion success for South Carolina this past game. First quarter, they were 3 for 4. Second quarter, 0 for 3. Third quarter, 0 for 3. Fourth quarter, 1 for 4. In the second quarter and third quarter, right? They go 0 for 6 on 3rd down. They combined for 30 yards of offense. 30 yards of offense in those 2 quarters. So the reason I bring that stat up is because when you're not able to sustain drives, you're not going to be able to stay on the field, right? You don't have to be a rocket scientist. You don't have to be Vince Lombardi or Bear Bryant to know that. And we saw that with USC. And a lot of that has to do with the fact that they haven't been able to run the ball consistently, not just this past game, but really the last 3 games. Those stats are inflated. Mario Anderson's one of the first runs he had in the opening drive against Jackson State, that was 40-plus yards. Vandy, towards the end of the game, fourth quarter, he had a 70-plus yard run. You take those 2 runs away, and those numbers give you a better indication of what USC has been able to do from a rushing standpoint in those 2 games, plus what we saw from this past week. You mentioned Xavier Luedecke continues to climb the ladder, literally, as he moves into second now on the all-time receiving list. When you look at that list, from your time of covering the Gamecocks, from your days of being a student at USC, just being around this program as long as you have, and being a fan growing up, you've seen some really talented wide receivers. Elshon Jeffrey, Pharaoh Cooper, Sterling Sharp. I know Kenny McKinley isn't in that top 5. Sidney Rice is, but we can keep going on and on. Brian Edwards. But now you throw in Xavier Legette because of the season that he's having. I know it's difficult sometimes to say, where does he go on your all-time Gamecock list? But as far as season performances, is that as simple as saying that this guy is having the number 2 season you've ever seen before now because he is in that number 2 spot? Or what do you think? I mean, he still has plenty of ways to go if he wants to catch Alshon, who had the luxury of playing in a bowl game. He also had a luxury of playing in the SEC championship in that 2010 season. But where do you stack his season, what Xavier Legette is doing in comparison to some of those greats?
It's tough, man. I mean, for first of all, the stats just kind of speak for themselves. So you can say, look, he literally has the second best year in program history for a wide receiver. So in some ways, man, it is that simple. As far as stacking them up and trying to get some intricacies in here of, how did he really compare? Watching Alshon do what he did, that was special. And all these seasons were special. I'm trying not to be a prisoner of the moment here with Legette. And, Alshon was amazing. Watching Sidney Rice did it twice. That's incredible. He was in, the top 5 there twice, I think. So that's crazy. But I didn't really see Sterling Sharp. So our older Gamecock fans always chime in with, hey, man, don't forget Sterling Sharp. I didn't really watch him when he was at Carolina. So I can't really speak to that. But as far as, once you start getting past Alshon, past Sydney, Legette may be right there just in terms of eye test, what he's meant to this offense, not having Juice Wells out there, not having a true just number 2 that's just stepped up and been consistent. The tight ends have kind of taken up that mantle, it seems like. So it's kind of been just other guys rotating around him. AB has been banged up several times this year. So, I think we'll really be able to try to put it in perspective, Mike, when the season's over. You could have a bowl game to tack onto those numbers. You never know. So I think it's been special, and it's been more special to me in that I don't want to say it came out of nowhere, but there's a big difference. As you know, there's a big difference between preseason hype and, oh man, this guy's had a great offseason. This guy's been our best receiver, in preseason. This guy's been the best player all summer. We hear stuff like that, but it doesn't always result in 1,000-yard receiving season. So to everything he's done in the offseason has translated to the game field, which I think is worth noting that's special considering this is not a guy that's been doing it his whole career at South Carolina. He's had to develop. He's had to go through some adversity. He's had to work his tail off to get where he is right now.
Yeah, you bring that up. And I said this after the game, and I've been mentioning this a couple times over the last week or so. With all due respect to the players, with all due respect to Shane Beamer and the coaching staff, with all due respect to Xavier Legette, anyone that would have said, oh, yeah, we knew that this was coming. We see him every day at practice. That's great. No one expected Juice Wells to go down earlier in the year. And let's call for what it is. Juice doesn't go down. Not saying Xavier Legette doesn't have a great season, but he's not putting up these numbers just because there's not going to be you're not going to be able to share the ball that many times. It's just not going to happen. Having said all that, it is interesting now. We get to a point now, and because we're taping this show on a Monday in comparison to how we usually do on Sunday, you see some different things that pop up on Monday. Juice Wells is putting some Facebook or Instagram post up on his story, I should say. People are interested if they'll see 3 this week. And I know you and me will talk about it more throughout the week. I know Chris will as well, and we'll get into it more and more. I'm not going to ask you what would having 3 back out there on the offensive side in a game like this, even if he's not able to be at 100%, because I always say, even from a physical standpoint, yeah, he could be back 100% or even 90%. I don't know where he's going to be at mentally, and that's not a Juice thing. It's about just any player when they come back from a lower body injury. What would having 3 in a uniform under the lights at Williams-Brice this Saturday against Clemson mean?
Well, you mentioned Williams-Brice, man. Just the added, not that the atmosphere needs another boost, But if 3 walks out there in a uniform, this place is going nuts. So it adds a little bit in terms of that. But I think it's just the threat that Juice had. I mean, look at the Georgia game, which is one really it's the only drive of this entire season that it felt like we had a close to 100% Juice Wells on the field with Luedecke on the field too. And South Carolina goes right down the field and scores. And Juice makes a play on a 3rd and long where it's just a simple, hey, we're going to run a receiver screen and not get our quarterback hit here. And Juice makes a couple of guys miss, runs through a tackle, and then he scores. And so we got such a small glimpse of that. I don't think we can expect to your point, we can't expect him to step out there and just be the Juice we all saw last year. From a physical, mental, or I think just as much as that, the timing, man, just being inserted back out there into an offense where these other guys have 11 games together where they've been out there, throwing the football to each other, throwing catch. So that's a factor too. But we all saw what Clemson saw what 3 did to them last year. So I think it changes the coverages. You can probably stretch the field a little bit more. It really is just a different game plan, I think, if you have to worry about Juice Wells. Even, if I'm Shane Beamer, I'm loving the talk about this week just because now I know
Absolutely.
Clemson's preparing for it, right?
Absolutely. It's simply because, and we'll get into it more this week. I know on Fridays you guys really hammer it getting into, and I'm sure I don't know who the guests will be this week, and I'll throw out Matt Conley. I don't know. But anyway, you usually get like a Clemson or someone that has, Matt's on 3 now with us. But Nate Wiggins is one of Clemson's top defensive backs. And at some point, as we all know, you got to pick your poison, right? If you have another weapon out there, then you have to decide what you're going to do. Are you going to double team Xavier Leggett, which we saw Kentucky do a lot of? They did a lot of, and at points in the game, they weren't able to do that. And we saw what South Carolina was able to do when they didn't double team them. So having Juice out there would be massive. Another guy who would be great to be able to see back up in the lineup this week, and I know you had a chance to go see him this past week. As we're taping this, depending on when this gets uploaded, I would say head on over to the Brooklyn Casey, I think it's the Baptist Church around 5. But DeCarrion Joyner is going to be doing a little food drive over there for Thanksgiving. If this is it, if this is the last game that South Carolina has, and I'm not trying to be pessimistic because obviously if they win, they go to a bowl game. But this very likely could be South Carolina's last game of the season, which could mean the last game for DeCarrion Joyner. I hope to see him back out there. I know you've had an opportunity just like myself, but going back to his Fort Dorchester days, getting to know him, I hope that young man is back out there this weekend because what he has meant to this program. I bring that up though, Wes, because when you have had a chance to talk with, from a recruiting standpoint, we hear names like Luke Doty DeCarrion Joyner. How important has he been in being able to get South Carolina back into this position now? And I know it's been a tough year, but to be able to get back into a position after where they were a couple of years ago.
Yeah, man, I think, Mike, you got to have great leaders if you're going to go through adversity. And it gets a little bit cliched sometimes, but it's true, man. The stuff that goes on in that locker room day to day, week to week, you need guys that if you're the coaching staff, they're pulling in the right direction. They're trying to pull the team along in the right direction. And that doesn't even mean they always agree with every decision the staff makes. Like you're going to have disagreements within your family, but I think you've got to have guys like DeCarrion who, at the end of the day, are going to say, "Hey, we got to keep this thing moving. We got to pull in the same direction. We can disagree, and then the next morning we're going to get right back to work." And so I think DeCarrion has been that man. I bumped into him last week. He was out there getting food for Harvest Hope for a food drive. You can tell he wants to leave his mark on not just this football program, but this community as well. It's a community that he'll tell you has been fantastic to him too, with his baby daughter and supporting him. So this was before the Kentucky game that I was out there, and I don't want to break his confidence, but I talked to him, and it would mean nothing more. It would mean the world to him to be able to find a way to get out there this week against Clemson and actually suit up, in his final. We know final regular season game, even if they win. Final game at Williams-Brice, even if they win, even if you get a bowl game, it's his final game at Williams-Brice. So he's doing everything in his power to rehab and try to get out there. You know, just knowing what we know about those injuries, it's hard to see him being 100%, but maybe he can get up to a point where he can help you. We know they're thin at the running back spot, and I know it would mean the world to DeCarrion Joyner if he could get out there and suit up to this program and play in front of these fans, at a place that just meant so much to him.
I will say this before we wrap things up. I want to talk about Jordan Strawn. DJ Braswell, I thought he did a great job coming in there. Statistically, when we talk about production, I think people look at those stats and they're like, oh, he didn't have this many rushing yards. He did some good things from a blocking standpoint. Really good job. In the post-game show that we do, Garrett Anderson brought that up, and I thought he was spot on with it. But talking about Jordan Strawn, talking about a guy that, when we talk about injuries, coming back from him, this guy has gone through 2 knee injuries, tore his ACL last year. He has been able to make an impact in multiple games this season. He hasn't been probably at that level where he's wanted to be consistently just because he's come back from that injury. And we talk about those mental hurdles. However, this past weekend, he played out of his freaking mind, named SEC Defensive Lineman of the Week, 2 sacks, forced a huge fumble towards midfield, which really put Kentucky in a pickle. I know they got the ball back on the following drive, but it really put them in a tough spot to be able to come back because now you got to do it even quicker. Jordan Strawn, I mean, shoot, I remember when he transferred in here, he waited his time behind some talented guys like Aaron Sterling and JJ Mbare. Then last season, the injury happens against Arkansas. What type of player are we going to get this year? Well, here we are during a time period where USC needs everyone to be playing at their best. And he's coming off his best game of not just the season, but since he's arrived at South Carolina.
Yeah, special moments there for him, I'm sure, man, and to collect the 2 sacks and just to get the late one with the forced fumble. I mean, dude, you're looking at that situation. Kentucky only needs a field goal to at least extend the game and tie. They're taking over at midfield. I was talking to one of the guys from KSR, Kentucky Sports Report. He told us before Kentucky feels really good about their kicker situation from 45 yards. So really, you're sitting there saying Kentucky's taking over at the 50. They need 20 yards to get to the 30 and feel pretty close to being pretty good about it, hitting a field goal. So we know South Carolina at times has struggled to get off the field. You don't want to go through 4 downs with Kentucky, and I think that was kind of when people started, here we go again, probably thinking about the Florida game, like you mentioned earlier, man. And so for him to just go ahead and say, look, now we're ending this drive right now, create a turnover, beat my man off the edge. Tonka gets the fumble recovery on the other end of it. That was special, man. And I'm sure that's a moment he's not going to soon forget. And hey, hopefully, Mike, that's a guy I felt like had some true NFL potential with his length, first step, quickness, reactiveness. And the injuries have just kept him from kind of fulfilling that potential. So hopefully he can finish this year on a bright spot and start to maybe get some NFL attention going into what will be a big few months for him with the NFL draft.
No question, because a couple of years ago when he was at Georgia State, he led the country, was tied for the most sacks in the country, arrives at South Carolina, like we mentioned, behind Sterling, behind JJ Mbare, who waited his time. And it was just like last season, 2022, like this was going to be the year for Jordan Strawn. He had 2 sacks. Like that's the thing. He had 2 sacks early on in the season, despite that ACL injury. And he was well on his way to being able to have a phenomenal season last year, in my opinion, and then being able to go on and play in the NFL. Things of force didn't go that way. Comes back this season, though, and trying to prove to people that he still has that step. He still has that step, despite the fact that it's what year 7? It feels like year 10 at this point, just like DK and Luke Doty. Doty will have a chance to come back next season. So I don't know. They're going to have to get Doty a rocking chair. But point being is this. It's going to be an exciting weekend at Williams-Brice Stadium. It was already going to be exciting. You got a president coming in town. You got a rivalry game. I mean, it's gonna be like having the state fair in town on steroids this past week, this weekend. So point being is Get there early. Get there early. It is going to be a circus, and fingers crossed that the weather will be good. He's Wes. I'm Mike Yuba. Intern Joe will be back in to see it. I'm looking down because, like I said, I can't believe Intern Joe has his own merch. Intern Joe will be back on the walkthrough on Sunday. But if you want to catch up with all your GC shows, head on over to the Gamecock Central YouTube page. If you're not a subscriber, sign up for free. Hit that little bell notification. You get all the GC Live updates anytime one of those GC Live shows, as well as videos, come up. Maybe you want to see a Beamer press conference after the game. Or if you are a podcast listener, head on over to the Gamecock Central podcast platform. Enjoy the game later this week, and be sure, tune in. The GC Live, Wes and Chris, they'll be on Wednesday, Friday. I'll be on tomorrow night, talking Tuesdays. We're actually going to do that at 5 o'clock. Intern Joe doesn't even know that yet, because Beamer's going to be speaking at 6. Yeah, 6.
I think 6, yep.
6 o'clock. And then we'll be on at 7, this week. No Thursday show. Enjoy your Thanksgiving and all that. That's it. The walkthrough. Intern Joe will be back in the 1 seat next week.